I've known this young lady for a long, long time. If you're listening on audio, you can see her on our YouTube channel as well. Just go and search for Mark Immelman. She is the troublemaker. Lisa Cornwell, how are you?
Well, I'll say 2 things, Mark. You probably love calling me that,
I do.
and, I appreciate the young lady comment because I have a birthday coming up, and with each one of those, the young seems to be further and further away, so I'll take it. You just keep
Uh,
it coming.
so when is the birthday? So our global audience can wish you on social
The
media.
21st, so
Of,
a couple days.
oh, really? Well, I'm
Yeah,
just a few days after you on the 2nd of October. All right. I know you're
okay.
turning
We'll
29.
celebrate.
I know you're turning 29. So why don't you take us
Right.
a little bit into you growing up in Fayetteville, Arkansas, playing some college golf, and give us the quick whistle stop that got you to where you currently are.
Well, you will love this. I mean, I grew up learning from a couple of, some South African great players, the Pappas brothers.
Hmm.
Back in the day, I remember just marveling at them, watching them hit golf balls at Fayetteville Country Club where I grew up playing. I was just a little kid and was exposed to the game early. And like a lot of us, just fell in love with it. And obviously, still carry that love and passion today. But it was just that constant quest to get better and to figure it out and to learn the golf swing and learn my mannerisms. I had some success early on. And so that just made me want to continue that. And I've talked a lot about the time as a teenager when I started taking lessons from David Ledbetter, and that was at the time when he was teaching Faldo and Nick Price and David Frost and Jan Stevenson. So then to go into that environment and to be able to witness the greatness of all those players. David Frost was kind of like a big brother. He would pick me up at the clubhouse and take me out to the back of the range. And David was so new to Lake Nona at the time.
Hmm. Yeah,
He was still building his facility. He was working out of a trailer.
I remember those.
And so it was, yeah, it was a very intimidating but exciting time. And then, also playing nationally and being around some great players who were just friends at the time. I didn't know that Tiger Woods would go on to be the greatest player, in my opinion, of all time. And, some of the other players I grew up around, like Kelly Keeney and Emily Klein and Wendy Ward, all of whom are still good friends. So it's just been a life of love for the game and this constant quest to keep learning more about it.
You being very modest, because if anyone, in fact, I want you to do this again because you did one evening after a broadcast, and I've done some work with Lisa, work alongside her for PGA Tour Live. After a broadcast, we were, I don't know, just communing, I guess, and you showed me a picture of your golf swing or video of your golf swing, I should say. Maybe it was during the show, and in a break, of course.
Probably.
And and I was like, golly, this woman can really go. And I say that with all of the respect in the world because I think you're being awfully modest about how good you really were. So it begs the question. First off, as a young girl, golf doesn't typically, and even the guys listening to this, golf is not really a girl sport, I guess. I can think of
Yeah.
other sports that certainly my daughters would have wanted to get into. How did you get into it, and how did you fall in love with a game that can be so solitary?
Well, I think that I grew up playing sports with guys. I mean, it started in as a neighborhood kid, whatever. It was football, wiffle ball, kickball. I mean, we played everything. And then when I got really active in our junior program at the country club, and as I developed and got better, I played all my golf with guys. And so I kind of had that mindset, I was chasing speed, chasing distance. I didn't want to be out hit by them. And if I was, I didn't want to be out hit by that big of an amount. So I just figured out a way to keep up. But I think because of that, I think that the people who I grew up playing golf with would tell you that I was probably one of the better ball strikers and one of the longer hitters. And I could get out of trouble. I like to shape shots. I was not afraid to hit it in the trees because I did that quite often. Um, but it was more of the consistent technique around the greens, I think, that kept me from taking it to the next level. That and just, some issues with the mental side of the game too, obviously. I know that you could go in some fun directions with that, and I have no doubt off the camera you will.
All
But
right.
but yeah, so it was, I grew up playing with guys, and that sort of shaped the way I think that I pursued and played golf. I play golf, I think, more like a guy even today. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Men and women just play the game differently, as you well know.
Yeah. Hey, for the folks that have seen you, back in the day on the Golf Channel, and folks who have met you that are listening to this, you're just a little mite. I mean, you're not the biggest thing in the world, obviously athletic, but petite. So I'm curious, and this is me kind of digging, I'm mining a little bit for insight. We're going to talk about habits of successful athletes, people and such, but for the people who want to hit it longer, that aren't blessed with 6 foot something frames and that sort of deal, how did you generate the speed? Was it just a function of playing with boys and trying to keep up with them?
I think part of it, yeah, and I have really strong hands, and I think so. I play with, I'm around a lot of different women who can hit the ball. you know, I'm older than most of the LPGA players,
They
unfortunately,
must
I
be
play
young
with
if you're
now.
29.
And I'm trying now, right? And I'm trying to keep up with them, but I think that I can consistently, even today, still keep my swing speed up and ball speed up because I have strong hands and arms, and that was just a genetic thing, I think, and the athleticism. But look, you could explain it much better than me. You did a swing breakdown. What was it yesterday of Ricky Fowler? Is he not one of the most impressive? I mean, pound for pound,
Hmm.
there's a whole book that you can write on that. So I mean, Ricky Fowler is the epitome of you do not have to be a big guy or girl to hit the ball a long way. I mean, that golf swing, try to copy that, and it will teach you all you want to know about speed.
I guess where I'm going is because I remember, back when I was a youngster, many, many moons ago, Trevor is 9 years my junior. And so I'm 13, 14 picking up golf, and he's 4 and 5. And I was
Yeah,
built in babysitting for my parents. So Trevor would tag along to the golf course, and he just kind of had to keep up with the teenagers. And he did. He ran along with a bag on his back and would hit the ball hard, and he learned to score very fast because you didn't need size to score around the greens.
right.
He started to get longer and longer, and all of a sudden, when he was 13, 14, he was hitting it a ton past us. So I think there's something to be said to the parents listening to this to say, hey, let your kids play with the big kids for a little while and just see how they almost adapt.
100%. I mean, and I tell people this all the time on when they watch women's golf. There are some teachers out there who are saying, and they compare it with, and I don't want to call anybody out, but they compare it with tennis, and they say, look, we see women serve the ball in tennis, and they're gaining speed, and they're not. We'll never be equal with men. Obviously, we're just built different genetically and
Hmm.
physically. But people make the comment that female tennis players, in terms of ball speed on the serve, are keeping up more than women. And what my response always is, go out there and watch the women play closely.
Yeah.
They rarely swing 100%. Whereas out on, in men's golf, it's full throttle, as all the time. They're chasing that speed. Women could hit it farther. They just don't. It's not the way that their courses are set up. It's not the way they learn to play the game. But you're right. I mean, that was for me. I wanted to hit it hard because of who I was playing with. I wanted to keep up, kind of like you mentioned with Trevor. He wanted to keep up with his big brother.
All right. Folks, I love this woman like a sister. I like working with you. Whenever I make some sort of a quip, if you've ever heard us on the air together, I love working with Lisa because she will always bring context to whatever I spout forth. And there's always a statistic that she will mine somewhere to add to my insight. Now I'm turning the microphone on you, and people, I cannot tell you how exciting this is. I
Wait,
reached
can
out.
I just say this? Can I
What?
just say this? I don't mean to interrupt,
This
but
is my
but
show.
I just no, but I want folks to know that sometimes my statistics drive you crazy, right? Like I'll be on, and you're working an event for CBS, and I'll get this random text from you. Oh, look who's throwing out the statistic. I love it. I mean, you really are. You're like a big brother. I love it when you give me a hard time because you do it quite well and it's sincere, and so we can go back and forth. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, you're welcome. I'm the host. Now you play
Okay.
analyst. Wait
Yes,
your
sir.
Um, I said to Lisa way back, I'm like, I want to get you on because in her role with Golf Channel, in her role as a player, in your role knowing all the ladies in the LPGA, knowing so many men, knowing Tiger Woods, I mean, asking the guy for swing advice. This is your relationship with these people. So you've mixed it up with the greats. And I think sometimes we, and I say folks like on the PGA Tour like me, we can get a bit myopic, and you start seeing things from one lane where you look wide, and that's why I joked about the stats because that's how your mind goes. So I said to Lisa, people, I was like, I want to know from you, in your experience, just You've been around them all. What habits do the successful ones have? So I'm going to just tee it up. I'm going to tee it up and let you have a swing here and go, okay, well, let's start with Tiger for argument's sake. What did Tiger do in all your time around him? That's, look, talent aside, what separated him and how he approached his craft?
Look, Mark, you know this as well as anybody. You see it on an everyday basis. And it's such a hard question to answer, but you try to be as thoughtful and as detailed as you can. I tell a story in the book that I wrote about an experience that we had, and Tiger and I played a lot of golf together. We played a lot of practice rounds together, and we hit a lot of golf balls together. So we would practice a lot together. I should have practiced with him more around the greens, but it was really just shot making. So that was where I was focused. But I tell the story about Colonel Woods and how Tiger and I had just played a practice round and we were hitting some golf balls afterwards. And I felt this thump on my back and I was like, what is that? And I looked back and Colonel Woods, he had that little fold out chair that he always took with him everywhere. He'd stick it in the
Colonel Woods,
ground
of
and
course, being Earl. Woods.
Earl, yeah. I always called him Colonel Woods.
Yeah.
And so I hit another shot and I feel again, I feel this thing. And so long story short, I look down and I tell Tiger, I'm like, I think your dad's throwing pine cones at me. And he looked back at Colonel Woods and looked at me and kind of laughed and he goes, he must not like the way that you're practicing. And so, I mean, I really admired and will forever admire Colonel Woods. He was a great mentor to me and taught me so much about the game, but it exemplified to me, especially as I'm older now and looking back on Tiger's career and knowing him the way that I do, it's what made Tiger who he is. And I say that to say, when I went back and had that conversation with Colonel Woods, he was not focused on where I was at the 9 o'clock position, whether I was rerouting it, hanging back, going forward. It was all about my process. And I think that we sometimes overuse two words. I think we overuse process and mindset. So when I say the process in terms of what Colonel Woods was really analyzing with me, it was how productive am I being with my time? How am I using my time to get better mentally and physically? And so he told me at that point, and I tried to explain this a little bit in the book, but it's kind of hard to get into full detail of a conversation. We sat there and watched Tiger practice for a few minutes. It felt like an eternity because I was so intimidated and knowing that I was doing something wrong and trying to get better with this man whom I admired. And we watched Tiger, and you can watch him today. If you watch him warm up, or whether it's practicing pre-tournament, warming up before a round, it is very methodical. It's never rushed. He will oftentimes go back to the bag and just stand there and either have a conversation or just kind of take a deep breath, wipe his face off, but everything has a purpose. So Tiger's not pausing the routine to wipe his face. He's pausing the routine to make sure he's taking in everything that's just happened. And so it's really this Green Beret mentality that Colonel Woods put forth in him. And I think that was initially the difference between a Tiger Woods and other greats. And it's just the approach to his process and how he goes about his business. I mean, there are so many different things and we'll dive into it, but that's the first thing. There are a lot of great players. There are a lot of talented kids. I played with a lot of kids who could hit the ball as well as Tiger. It was different. And I think that to me, that was the difference. It was the Colonel Woods effect on Tiger.
All right, two things. I'm officially lobbying our bosses down there in Ponte Vedra that I want to go with you early next year. And I'm going to not tee you up and turn the tables on you during a show because we can, with all the time in those feature groups, for you to tell the story. Because I think this is the sort of stuff where people who download this podcast, they hear all these experts talk about this ad nauseum, but then to hear it from kind of, well, I hate to say the horse's mouth, but to hear the personal anecdote, I've been there, I've experienced, to use your word, the Green Beret mentality. This stuff's real, and it does separate competition. Yes?
It honestly gives me goosebumps when you just said that because it's so true. to me, it's so obvious and evident, and you can see it, you can feel it, sort of another, I guess it's in relation to this, but I learned this after when I was working for Golf Channel and as an interviewer. And you can learn a lot of habits, as you well know, from players
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how they feel about themselves, where they are mentally, what's just happened. I've always told people, they've always asked me, what's your favorite interview to do? How great is it to interview the winner, on Sunday? That was honestly my least favorite interview to do because it's so ceremonial. You get nothing out of it. How do you feel? What's it like? The best interview is when you get a player on a Saturday or maybe a Friday, but usually on a Saturday, and they've had a little bit of a struggle, but they're still right there. And I'll give you a good example. Vision 54, Lynn Marriott and Pia Nilsson, they, in their latest book, they had How to Be a Player. They had this wonderful example. And this is another thing that I think that sets Tiger Woods apart. And look, and I will say the same for John Rahm. I would say the same for like a Suzanne Pedersen. I would say the same for a Kari Webb, because I noticed it's very rare. Annika had it. It's a very rare trait, but they pointed it out so perfectly, and I never realized it before, that these players always control the narrative. Always. Nick Saban does it in his every time he gives a post game interview, he does it. When I was covering the Reds, when I was in Cincinnati, Ken Griffey did it beautifully. He always controlled the narrative. So by that, I mean, Tiger Woods, if I asked him, in fact, I did at Firestone, and it was on a Friday, and he hadn't played in a while. He'd been on vacation. And I didn't want to say that he had a poor putting day because he didn't, but I could tell that his speed control was a little bit off. It was just, he'd gotten there late. He was playing on a different surface than where he'd been practicing. He went to Switzerland and then came and teed it up there. And you could just tell that the speed control was off. And so I'm doing the Friday interview. So I know how he is. And so I kind of try to rib him a little bit. And I said, look, you're coming off a vacation. Speed control looked a little bit off. How much are you still adjusting to these greens? And Tiger Woods gave the answer that he always gives anytime in that moment. And he will never let you see a deficiency because he never believes that in his mind. The first thing he said to me, he said, I putted well today, Lisa. He said, he said, I'm proud of the way that I rolled it. And he went on and gave obviously a great answer. But the very first reaction was he wasn't letting me know that he putted well today. He was letting himself know that he putted well today. And that's what Lynn and Pia talk about in that book. And it's so incredible to go into that thinking behind a player or a coach like Nick Saban. Pay attention to their interviews. Go listen to Nick Saban. Nick Saban and Tiger Woods are so similar in that regard that they will never let themselves believe anything other than the narrative that they want to believe and project, not to everybody else, but to themselves.
That brings me to self-talk, and I want to ask about that. But first, I get to interview folks, obviously as you do. And you do as the interviewer, you sense and you can see if a person's comfortable or not. Like you talk to Jordan and he's always fiddling with and adjusting his shirt, and everyone's got these isms. And if they don't have that, there's umming and ahhing and use of the word, and look, we've all got our things, this, right? And we're always trying to improve. But to me, there's a certain comfort level that certain people have where the spotlight turns on them and the microphone's shoved in their face. And then they have the wherewithal to go, just to take a breath and organize their thoughts before they just start vomiting drivel on whoever the interviewer is. Now, I say this because all the golfers watching this, they're fascinated by your story. I am. But everyone gets to the situation on a golf course where it's like, oh my goodness, it's that shot, the one I've been dreading. The microphone's now in my face and the spotlight is on. To just like take a beat, try and slow down all the mayhem that's going on around the place. I want your commentary there, please.
It's interesting. And you're right. You can definitely see it in folks. I will say to that point, I love how you mentioned Jordan Spieth, like fidgeting and doing that. The best answer and response I ever got from Jordan Spieth had nothing to do with, something that he had done perfectly. It was after second or third round at Farmers, and he played the most Jordan Spieth type of round ever. I think he hit 9 greens and shot like 66.
All right.
And it was incredible. And my first question wasn't about, oh, how great the 66 was. I said, Jordan, I got to go back to the sixth hole. To me, this was the shot of this was the hole that totally defined your round. Blew it way right, had to bend it around a tree, hit it in a bunker, hit the bunker shot, impossible bunker shot, short-sided himself, hit it to like 3 feet and made the putt for par. And he lit up, and all of a sudden he could not wait to answer that. He was fidgety at first, and then he stopped because that was his comfort zone. Like, he loved it. But it just really tells you a lot about him as a player. That's where he is comfortable. He is comfortable sort of in that, let me show you what I can do. I mean, he is total entertainment. As we've talked about on PGA Tour Live, you can just mic him up and not have a host or an analyst.
Mm-hmm.
But it just showed that in that moment of, I'm uncomfortable, what are you going to ask me about? Are you going to ask me about only hitting 9 greens? I don't want to answer that. And then you take it to this sort of miracle par that he made, and this guy all of a sudden loses all these little quirks, and he's totally engaged. It's one of my favorite memories I think I've ever done in terms of interviewing a player, just because not many players would be like that. Jordan Spieth embraced it. He welcomed it. He was so proud of it. But yeah, I mean, look, you can learn a lot about these players and how they respond. And honestly, that I think is one of the fun parts about the job that we get, is we get to watch them up close and personal, not just the great shots, but the shots where they miss and the reaction. I mean, I could go on and on for days about that, what we get to see.
Okay.
On PGA Tour Live, I mean.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, yeah. Certainly at times we get cut off because there's other stuff to talk about, but we can ramble a bit. But we both love the thing so much, and everyone who talks about it kind of does. I think there's an element that I hear you talk about that I want to now address, and it's the situation where one is true to self. Where you talk about the Spieth, a lot of folks, when they have a bad ball striking day, golfers listening to this, watching this, professionals maybe watching this, listening to this, where it's like, okay, I don't want to be that person. I hit it poorly. And that's why you start dodging the question about striking. Well, you talked about Jordan lighting up because he's that guy. That's how he plays the game. So I want to talk about comfort with self, because I feel like some of the really greats are, no matter who they are. Like, I respect you because you're completely comfortable in who you are. And it shines, you're authentic, so it makes you good at what you do. So I'd love your commentary, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I do think that it's important, but it's hard to achieve. I mean, it's nice to hear that you think that I'm comfortable with myself, but I can tell you that for a long time in this business, I struggled. We try to find our own validity, and we need that feedback that you're good at something or you're great at something. In fact, it's interesting, when you sent me the message about coming on here, I've been in the middle of, I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but I'm very intrigued by not just the frame of mind of champions, but political leaders, great chess players, anybody who has achieved greatness. And so when you reached out, I was actually listening. Have you heard of the Huberman Lab, the podcast?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm
So
trying to
we
on
go.
this one, by the way.
Oh, it would be phenomenal, because
Yeah.
I just listened to one, and it's sort of in terms of the question that you just asked. It was an episode from back in July, how to enhance performance and learning and applying good mindset. And it goes back to that whole word mindset. I think that in golf it's used so much and people don't even know what it means. But he explains it really well. But anyway, in this episode, in this podcast, he specifically is talking about the feedback that we get as kids. And this sort of goes back, and I've thought a lot about this in terms of Tiger. How, whether our coaches or our parents, what they say to us is, as we're growing and learning and getting feedback. So I'll give you an example. I got the feedback when I was a kid. Lisa, you're a great athlete. Lisa, you're such a great golfer. Lisa, oh my gosh, you can hit the ball great. Lisa, great win in the tournament. what this podcast, what he talks about in it is that in all the research that they've done, the people who end up having the most success are not people who get feedback based on performance, but it's feedback based on work ethic.
Mhm.
And in my mind, I started thinking about that. I guarantee you, if you were to ask Tiger the feedback that he got from Earl, I mean, he did, I'm sure, get from Colonel Woods, you're great, you know, you're great. Of course, he told him that he was great. But I would bet money that Tiger would say that his dad gave him the biggest feedback on the amount and effort that he put into honing his craft. And all the statistical analysis that they talk about in this one specific podcast. And I think that this is great for parents of young junior golfers. I wish that I could pass this out to all of them to go listen to this specific podcast. And you don't have to be a great athlete. That this can apply to whether you're a musician, a student, but to constantly give feedback and praise based on the amount of effort that's put into it, not the success, not great win, great A that you had in your math class. And the evidence that they speak of is it's outstanding in terms of the success that students, athletes, performers achieve versus the kind of feedback that they get as a young person.
Okay, I'm in trouble. Yeah, that's why I'm writing notes so I can make sure I don't lose my train of thought, because I do this when smart people talk and my mind starts whizzing. First off, I've got a dear friend. He's a principal of a high school, successful player in his own right, achiever, I would call him. And he always, as the principal of the school, the head of school, talks about don't prepare the road for the child, prepare the child for the road. So basically, he's got no beef with putting a child through some adversity so they understand, okay, this is going to happen, instead of trying to clear the path in front of them. So I'd love your take over there, but I had a brush with you talk about politicians and successful people and such, and I don't think people know that you're related to one of America's, United States' great presidents, in Bill Clinton. And I was the captain of the international team at the Palmer Cup in your neck of the woods there in Arkansas.
Yep.
And the opening ceremonies, he's the guest speaker because it's in Little Rock. And he gets up there and it's hot as rip in June. I mean, it's like Hades. And there's nary a cloud in the sky, and I'm like, I've basically leaking out of every pore in my body. And this man gets up there as cool as a cucumber. And I'm sitting, because we're on the stage, behind him over here, looking at him so I can see what he does. So he pulls out his notes out of his jacket. He's got a jacket on in the heat, by the way. Still, and I'm overcooked. He lays the notes down on the table, does the whole thing, the greet, greet, greet. All of a sudden, out of the blue, this breeze comes up and blows his notes off the lectern down onto the stage. He doesn't even look at the notes blowing away. He goes, right, there was like one piece of page left. He folds it up, puts it in his pocket, and just wows the audience for like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And it wasn't what he said. It was like, this was a person so comfortable with self, so immersed in who he was, what he was doing, that he could just fill the void and not panic. So,
Yeah.
so I'd love your insight there before I get to the children thing, because I think there's lessons, because I'm always trying to turn this to a golf lesson. So I think there's
Right.
lessons in this.
Well, I mean, you should, next time you're around him, ask him about the time that the teleprompter went out when he was delivering the State of the Union,
Really?
and nobody knew it. It's incredible. And that's him. But you're right. It's not just as much the comfort in self, but I think that it's the passion about the message. And that's one thing that I think that's always set somebody like Bill Clinton apart, because if he is invested in it enough to speak about it, he's going to do everything that he can to learn about it ahead of time. So he doesn't need the notes. And that's part of it. So I think that it goes back to not just the comfort in self, but having complete knowledge and passion about whatever may be in front of him at the moment. I mean, you're talking about him at that time, but I mean, like I was like all of us, I'm sure you, when you first got into TV, it's a completely different ball game. It's intimidating. You question yourself. You don't always get a lot of feedback, but the more that you do it,
Good,
they
good.
could,
Especially on
They
social media. Golly.
oh yeah, stay off of that for feedback. I've learned that the hard way. But I mean, think about how intimidated you would have been when you were a new broadcaster and you had done all this research. You knew that you had Adam Scott and you know whoever Tyrrell Hatton in the group, and then all of a sudden they said, "Oh no, Mark, we're going to at the last second put you with so and so." I mean, as a new broadcaster, you would have freaked out,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word. But now you would be like, okay, because you know the players, you know the role. Even if you don't have everything that you need to do the job the way you would want to, you would figure it out.
Mhm.
So it's sort of the same thing. It's the comfort level, it's the experience, but it's the passion that you have for what you do and the knowledge that you have. I mean, your whole career has led you to be prepared for any group that you tackle on the PGA Tour because all you do is research this stuff. So you're prepared even without knowing that you're prepared.
Well, I guess the lesson for the viewers and listeners here is that, not to scoff at practice, for the golfer.
Yeah.
And I think, you've been around Tiger and you can now circle back to this sort of stuff. That practice has to be purpose driven. It's not just bashing balls away out there. This was
Oh,
this was your Earl Woods experience again, I guess.
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, preparation is everything. So when you get in that moment that you're prepared. I mean, that could relate to anything. What we do, what golfers do. Think about airline pilots. Same
Mm.
thing. They're not facing those situations every day, but when it happens, you want them to be ready for it. Golfers want that too. I mean, what was the shot that Cam Davis hit? Did you see that? It was incredible. He doesn't practice that. Did you see that? It was a few inches off of the cart path on Sunday and had to get real steep on it. When was the last time that he ever practiced that shot? It was a par five, ended up holing it for eagle. I mean, it was incredible.
Mhm.
But anybody else, if you're worried about Sunday, you're worried about money and position, and oh my gosh, I don't want to look like a fool in front of all these people. He just went about his business and trusted that all the hours and hours and hours of preparation gave him confidence to pull it off, and he did. He holed it.
Well, folks, what Lisa's also saying as I read between the lines and listen to her, that, practice for golf needs to be more than just hitting 7 irons, shot after shot after shot. You got to be prepared for whatever the examination is going to be.
Well, and I try to do that now. I mean, I don't practice nearly as much as I used to, not
Really?
even
Oh,
close.
yeah, you don't have to admit that.
No, but I was going to say when I was even 5 years ago or so, I mean, if I get into that moment where I feel like I'm starting to practice a little bit more and pay attention, I always go back to that time on the range with Colonel Woods, and I will catch myself, just slow down, quit trying to hit a perfect shot, or after you've hit, you know, 10 7 irons in a row, try to shape them a little bit. Just try to do something different to test yourself, just to break it up and allow you to focus on something different. It's a really good mental test to do, and it allows you to go through that thought process on the range that will make you, as you said, better prepared on the golf course. It's easy just to sit on a range and beat balls and try to hit your 7 iron as straight as possible to a target, but shaping shots is the best way, I think, to prepare yourself out on the golf course, just to do something different.
Yeah. And along those lines now, I'm going to get back to where I began, believe it or not. Um,
No, I put you way off topic,
with
sorry.
the prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. Now I'm going to change words in there and say prepare the golfer for the golf course, not the golf course for the golfer. And the golf course we play on, golfers listening to this, it's changing, sometimes within the hour, conditions wise, or whatever the case might be. And so with the preparation in terms of this, you're going to be prepared for everything. Um, I will make a comment now, then I want you to elaborate, please. I oftentimes say to golfers, whether it's a member guest golfer or an elite amateur, even an aspirant professional, don't teach the pros anymore. You've got to, when you get on the first tee, imagine that you're getting into a boxing ring and this golf course is going to land some punches, but you've got to make it through 12 rounds and you're going to be dinged and you're going to be bruised and stuff, but you have to survive. So it's a mindset, there's your word, that you get into this round of golf for, and you prepared for adversity because it's likely to happen. Now, you played golf at the very highest level. Please, would you go there?
I wish that I knew then or could put into sort of what I feel about it now, and I think a lot of it's from getting to watch these players. every week, every shot on PGA Tour Live, and how often they take their medicine. I mean, and you know that I'm a stats person. I like to bring this out, but whenever it pops up on the screen and I'm working, I always like to remind folks at home that the make percentage on the PGA Tour from 8 feet is actually pretty low. You
50%.
know,
Yeah.
how many of us? I think it's lower than that, isn't it? But anyway, you would
Well, 8
probably.
feet is the
I would. I would.
event
I
number.
would trust you. I would trust you more. But
Mhm.
we go out there and these. I'm talking about players who play once or twice a week, and they expect to make every 8 footer, and we get all bent out of shape when we don't. I mean, it's just sort of bringing it back that these players, they're not perfect. They make mistakes out there, but they also know when some bogeys are okay because they're going to go out there and trust the fact that their game's going to, get them back to where they want to be. I say that I was playing about a month ago and I just decided I haven't been playing great golf because I'm not playing a lot. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to make a double bogey. That's my goal. I'm not going to make a double bogey because I always feel like I'm going to make a few birdies. And it was the first time in forever that I shot under par. And that was the only difference. I did not want to make big mistakes. And if I was in a position where I was going to make bogey, I was going to try to hit the miracle shot.
Mhm.
I was just going to go out, take my bogey, go on. And I think that surprisingly, professional golfers, I mean, you'll have a Jordan Spieth who will take on more challenges than a lot of folks, but they know when to attack and when not to. Now, look, they're great wedge players, so we see them if they hit in the trees, they can punch out to a number, and a lot of times you'll see them get up and down. But they play smart golf. It is smart golf, and it's not trying to do more than they have in front of them. And so I think for a lot of folks trying to get better, I mean, if you're not a scratch golfer, if you're out there shooting 85, 90, even 80, how can I get better this weekend? Don't get a double on the card. What can I do mentally? Because you can't always control it physically. What can I do when I'm out there to avoid putting a double on the card? You'll all of a sudden see if you're making fewer doubles, your scores obviously are going to improve dramatically.
Fantastic. All right, one more question. I'm going to take it back to the Oval Office, please.
Okay.
Because what you talk about there with risk assessment and to a certain extent being risk averse, what I'm kind of hearing is when it comes to decision making, and golf is just, it's a selection of decisions made over about 4.5 hours or whatever. And you got to try as far as possible to remove emotion from said decisions. So now, you know, Uncle Bill, President Clinton. I'm expecting in that job that those aren't decisions that are made irrationally. There's information taken on before a decision is made. I think that's pretty logical. I do want your comment about that very theory, though, because I think there's something in it.
Well, obviously, and the person in that position, when it comes down to it, has to make the gut call. But in those moments, there are no gut calls. That is however long a preparation that leads you to that moment. I mean, we hear golfers talk about teams around them and preparing them for everything and the importance of it. A president has the same thing. I mean, you have very close advisors, people are helping you, they're giving you detailed information. It's no different in golf. I mean, you're getting detailed feedback of what you're doing every single day. There's a heavy correlation, I think, between the two.
But, and this has jogged my mind, the successful one is listening to, digesting, and then applying said information. Where so many golfers, and yeah, I'm calling you out here as the
Mm.
recovering golf instructor, you hearing stuff and it's flying out the other side because it
I
doesn't
did.
jive with your mind, however your vibe is right now.
Yeah, well, no, and I'm the first to admit that that's I think one of the reasons that kept me from taking my game to the next level is to really understand the importance of every decision that was made out there, and not just during competition, but the lead up to competition. The how are you gonna how are you gonna space out your time? What are you going to focus on? What matters now? Where are your deficiency or deficiencies? And I think that's what every great athlete, great business leader, great politician it's the full process of going through it. And I do think that that's an important word, because it's, if you're involved in it every single day and you're paying attention to what's around you and what's happening and the importance of certain aspects behind that decision making process, you're much more likely to make the best outcome in terms of the decision. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. And you're right. I wasn't listening.
Well,
It's why I'm now talking about golf.
well, thankfully for us, you didn't listen, because you're one of the best in the industry, and we're lucky to have you. Radio Troublemaker, tell the folks about the book, please, where they can find it, or where they can follow you, et cetera, because I'm sure they're intrigued. Those who don't know you.
Yeah, you can go to my website, lisacornwell.com. And there's information about the book. There's information about my broadcast history. I don't know if you know this, Mark. Did I tell you this, that Nelson Mandela's African birth name translates to troublemaker?
Now you put me on the spot to remember what his birth name was. Something with an M.
I don't. Yeah.
Well, forgive me. I'm going to put the tail on this podcast with his real name, but no, I did not know that.
But that is, anyway, so it goes back to and I love how you do call me troublemaker. I embrace it. And I know that you love sharing that and calling me that. We've had some good laughs over it. But no, you can find out a lot more about it. lisacornwell.com. There's all sorts of information, a link to order the book. And yeah, just kind of on that note, you mentioned my cousin Bill Clinton. He was a big advisor with me. And interestingly enough, and there's a chapter in there where I talk about Tiger and that experience and some of the things that I went through as a young junior golfer and the difficulties. So it's not all about Golf Channel. That's a portion of the book, but it's a lot about, I think, some of the constraints and just things that I went through as a young person that stopped me from continuing to pursue this dream that I had. But when I was writing the book, it was during COVID when a lot of this was taking place, and Bill was like, he said, "Look, I'm really proud of you for writing this book." He said, "But we have to," he said, I can feel the emotion, and I know that you're angry and you want to get this out there, but you can't force the reader to be angry with you. We've got to temper this a little bit." So he was a great advisor to me in that. And, I was really grateful to have the feedback and the insight. It always amazes me anytime we have these kinds of discussions, the depth to which he understands each and every problem at hand, and he'll relate it to his own experiences. I mean, he's very open talking about the things that he's been through publicly and the mistakes that he's made and sort of the lessons that he's learned from it. So it was a valuable lesson for me in that whole process.
Well, I'm honored that you would share it. Forgive me for calling him uncle, but again, I think you're just so young and 29 and fresh and such. So
right, exactly. Yeah.
The book,
29th birthday.
Exactly. The book, folks, is called Troublemaker. Lisa, thank you. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your friendship.
You're great, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait until next year we get to work together. I'll drive you crazy with my stats.
I'll see you then.